Hi guys, this is Adam Young here. This is Joshua in the video, and he posted on the advanced Facebook group talking about how his shots are going very high. They tend to go to the right. They're very weak in terms of distance, and so he's kind of asking for advice on what to change. And so he got a lot of well-meaning advice from the amateurs in the group, and I thought I'd kind of analyze some of that advice just to help you guys understand a little bit more about cause and effect, maybe how I think or look at this situation. And then at the end, I'm going to offer Joshua a simple solution to this, or a couple of simple solutions. So I actually like a lot of Joshua's swing. I think for the fact that he says he's not very practiced or hasn't spent a long time playing golf, he's got a lot of really good things. So decent posture. Takeaway is absolutely fine. I mean, that could be on tour as he swings back there. That's a great looking position. The hands are, level with the sternum or very close to the sternum. Club's on a decent angle there. Oh, that's a circle, not a line. So club's on a decent angle. I like a lot about that. As he gets to the top, again, lots of good things there. The arm position is pretty good. It could be a bit more width there, but I don't think that's the most important thing right now. As he starts down, things get a little bit funky, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But here you can see, and a few players did mention it, the club is very kind of steep. I suppose you could analyze steep in a lot of different ways. But in terms of where the club is bisecting the body, it's running through his trapezius, or his neck muscle there. For most professionals, I mean, if I just grab I got Tiger Woods straight away. I always use these models, but it doesn't have to be Tiger Woods. You could pick anybody, but you can see how it's bisecting the bicep there. So it's a lot shallower or more behind him. I mean, in terms of the shaft pitch, it's not too far off. I mean, Tiger here is, 53 degrees versus 66 degrees. So it wouldn't need a huge change. We'll talk about that in a moment. But he is very far out in front of his body. To put that in relative terms, Tiger's club is around about here. So that club is much more in front of his body. So that's going to signify a left swing path. And if we look through here, I mean, I don't need a radar device to kind of tell that path is probably about 10 to 15 degrees to the left through impact. And his club face is actually quite square to the target. So you could say that the club face is 15 or 10 or 15 degrees open to his path. So it's a big cut across movement, or a flop shot, or some people even mention it's like a bunker shot, sand shot. And then the rest of it's pretty good. There's lots of good things in it. Decent end position. I think most of it is just a result of what happened before it. So some of the advice, some people talked about losing posture, and he has a nice little squat move in transition, which all the tour pros do. So, this is a very athletic movement. So I can tell this guy has played sports where he drops down here. It's a pretty good move that I'd say 95% of tour pros, if not more, exhibit that move. He does kind of reverse that and jump up quite a lot. I don't think that's necessarily too bad. All players will have some vertical movement through impact and some rotational movement, but this player can't rotate at the moment, and we'll go through some of the reasons why. So I suppose before I go through any other advice, the first thing I'm going to mention is, by the time this player gets to about here, that club face is very, very open. So it's just wide open at that point, and there could be a lot of reasons for that. I usually will take a look at the lead wrist. Let's have a look here. It's quite hard, a difficult angle to do it from, but I look at the lead wrist there, and I look at the club face, the leading edge relationship to it, and it's not too bad. The club face is actually close to the wrist, but that club head is very open. It's very toe down at that point, and that could be just purely attributed to too much lead wrist extension. So you could think of a flatter lead wrist. Let's bring back Tiger and have a look at him as he starts down, and you can see a much flatter wrist position. And so that actually changes the club face orientation. The more the player on the left, Joshua, the more he cups his lead wrist, as opposed to getting it flatter, the more open that club face is going to be early on. I mean, if I use a really extreme example, and I wouldn't recommend this to anybody really, but it's a nice visual to show the difference between Joshua and what most or a lot of professionals have some of this. So lead wrist flexion. I mean, look at the difference in wrist angles there with Dustin Johnson compared to Joshua on the left. So it just changes the relationship of the club head to the path. So you can see that's Dustin Johnson's club face, much more facing the sky. Again, I wouldn't recommend that. I'm just using an example of an extremely, or the extreme opposite end of the scale. And now there are some players on tour who do have more cupped wrists, like Joshua on the left, but they usually have very strong grips to counter that. I probably wouldn't tweak Joshua's grip. I'd probably go more the lead wrist extension route, so adding some of Dustin Johnson's move, because that's also going to help add a little bit more shaft lean and produce a more powerful shot, as well as improve ground contact. So everything else is kind of the result of that, or it's a symptom of that. So some players said, Joshua's losing his posture. This is true. He is just jumping up. Well, that's because he can't rotate as much. He can't really open his chest out, because when the club face is so open here, if I get 100 golfers and I ask them to really open their chest out through impact, I think he actually does a decent job of it. But if I asked 100 golfers to open their chest out more, they would actually present the face more open to the path. So Joshua kind of instinctively understands this and uses more vertical jump to create power instead of rotation. And the vertical jump also allows his hands to, or the club head to overtake his hands, which is another club face closing move. So lots of players said he's too wristy. Well, he needs to be, because being wristy, or going through a lot of lead wrist extension through impact, that is a way of closing the face when we get down at the bottom of the swing. So from here to here, basically flipping the hands is a way of closing the club face. If he didn't have that, he'd hit it even farther right and shorter. Lots of players mentioned the path is out to in. I mentioned that earlier as well. Yes, it is, probably 10 to 15 degrees. But at the moment, he needs that because the club face is so open. If we were to give him a tour player's swing direction, straight down the line, or a much more neutral path, he would hit it farther right. So a straight swing path or a square swing path is not a good idea for this player at this moment with the open face. We need to fix that first. Someone also mentioned a loss of rotation. We talked about that. More rotation would make this player worse until he gets that club face under control. Someone mentioned laying the club down. So we talked earlier about the difference between, say, Tigers, or you could even get Dustin Johnson. I know I'm cheating here with a driver, so it's going to be flatter. But Dustin Johnson's got a 44-degree angle. This player, his club shaft is 60 at that point, and there's lots of reasons why we shouldn't put too much stock in those 2D analysis of the swing plane or the shaft pitch. But one word of advice is, or a sentence of advice is, don't shallow the club more, because shallowing the club here tends to open the face even more. So that, again, that's another thing that this player, or would make this player worse. This player is actually steepening the club in an attempt, or one of the attempts, to try and close the face down because his wrist angles are quite poor. And another piece of advice was to try and get the hands ahead of the ball through impact. Again, that relates to the wristy release. For all else being equal, a player with their hands more ahead of the ball will tend to present more of an open face. This player already has an open face. It's not going to be good for this player. So really, this video, I want you guys to understand that lots of things, it's a correct analysis, right, of what the player is doing. The player's not laying the shaft down. They're swinging left. They're jumping. They're losing their posture. They're being wristy. Those are correct analyses. However, they're symptoms. And so if you actually fix all of those things, or I shouldn't say fix, if you change all of those things we've mentioned, laying the shaft down, getting his hands ahead of the ball, adding rotation, getting rid of the wristy flip, this player would be worse. He'd probably shank it. If he didn't hit it 45 degrees right from the club face being so open, he would shank it. So first off, this is the intervention that I would make. First off, I would change the wrist angles at the top. Now, lots of players, they actually start down. So from here to here, they flex the lead wrist. So they add a little bit of Dustin Johnson. So that right wrist will bend back a little bit. And the lead wrist, you could think of it as the logo of your glove pointing towards the sky a little bit more. Again, we don't want a full-on Dustin Johnson here, but adding some of that in transition can help. A preferred method for me would be more of a John Rahm look. So if I get John Rahm here, let me just find him, straight away. John Rahm actually does it very early. So you can see John Rahm starts to flex the lead wrist and bow it very early. Now, that's not necessary. There are not a lot of tour players that do that. John Rahm is one, Dustin Johnson is one, Morikawa is another player. It's not completely necessary, but I do think it's easier for most people to implement that route. So in other words, doing it as they're swinging back a little bit. And so once he's got the club face in position, from there he can swing down and it'll be with a more closed face. So he should find straight away there's going to be more powerful flight, lower loft, and more distance. However, the shot is probably going to fly more left. It should be a straight pull for this player now because we've fixed only the club face. The path is still to the left, but that's okay. That's a step in the right direction. At least we've got these longer shots going. Now, in terms of actually changing the path, I like to go very, very simple, and I use a lot of the time just a nail through the ball. I love this drill. I talk about it in Next Level Golf and a few of my other programs. There are loads of different variants of this, but I would, for this player, angle that nail to the right. And so all you're asking to do is that this player is going to tap into their instinct and basically hammer the nail through the ball in that direction. So they're not going to think mechanically about their swing or anything like that, but it will change the mechanics. If I give 100 players a nail that is angled more to the right, they will shallow the shaft a little bit more. The club will be more behind them. The swing path will be more in to out. So we don't often have to, or we don't always have to think mechanically in order to change our mechanics. I use this myself. I'm an advanced player. I can hit it like a tour player, but I still, when I'm changing my swing path, I just use this visual myself. It doesn't have to be complicated or complex. So those are the two bits of advice. To summarize that, I would say get to the top. A drill would be get to the top and stop. Change the wrist angles, so flatten the lead wrist off, bend the right wrist back a little bit, feel like you're supporting a tray of drinks at the top, something like that. That's going to get the club face into position. From there, if you can think of two things at once, hammer a nail to the right like that, and that should solve the path. I think if you just get one of those things over the next week, that's going to be pretty good. If you're to add the nail drill as well, you're going to be well on your way to having that swing look pretty beautiful.